The kitchen's more comfortable for you, isn't it? We need the space out here. She said it with a smile. Sweet, calm, in front of 12 people. And when the silence broke, someone laughed, then another. I picked up my plate and walked through that kitchen door. What she didn't know was that without my signature, she wouldn't even own that house. My name is Celeste. I'm 62 years old. I spent 30 years as a school administrator. Not a glamorous job, but an important one. I kept systems running. I solved problems before they became crises. I raised a son mostly alone after my husband Gerald got sick, and I kept our family steady even when everything felt like it was tilting. Gerald passed 5 years ago. I've been living on my pension and his life insurance since then. Nothing extravagant. I drive a 10-year-old Honda. I shop sales. I wear the same pearl stud earrings I've had since 1998, and the only ring I care about is my wedding band. When my son Daniel married Priya 3 years ago, I showed up with an open heart. I genuinely liked her at first. She was sharp, polished, confident. But within the first year, something shifted. I wasn't treated like his mother anymore. I was treated like a scheduling conflict, like background noise. I never said a word about it, because that's how I was raised. You show love through action, not argument. I wasn't flashy. I didn't drive a nice car or wear designer anything. But I had quietly done something for that marriage that neither of them had fully reckoned with yet. If you've ever been underestimated because you don't make noise, subscribe and tell me in the comments. I want to hear from you. Click hype and let's go. The dinner party was on a Saturday. Daniel and Priya were hosting 12 people, her colleagues from the marketing firm, two of her siblings, and a few neighbors from their street. I got the text the day before. One day. After 3 years of being his mother, I got a text that read, "Hey Mom, we're having people over tomorrow if you want to come." No time, no address reminder, just that. I still went. I made my green bean casserole, the one Daniel has asked for every Thanksgiving since he was 9 years old. I brought a bottle of Pinot Grigio. I wore my good blouse. When I rang the bell, Priya opened the door in a silk wrap dress and looked at my casserole dish the way you look at something you didn't order. "Oh, how sweet," she said. Then she turned and called for Daniel. He came around the corner, kissed my cheek, said, "Mom, glad you made it," and was immediately pulled into a conversation with someone else. I set my dish on the counter and stood in the living room smiling at people I didn't know. When dinner was called, everyone moved toward the dining table. It was a long table, beautifully set. I counted the chairs. 12 chairs, 12 guests. I counted again. Then Priya appeared at my elbow with a plate and silverware. Her smile was already in place. "Oh, we're a little tight tonight. You don't mind the kitchen, do you? It's actually quieter in there." She said it loud enough for the room to hear. I know she did. There was a half-second of silence, that particular silence that means everyone heard and no one knows what to do. Then one of her colleagues gave a short laugh. Someone else said something about the chef's table. A few more people smiled into their wine glasses. I took the plate. I said nothing. I walked into the kitchen. I sat at the small island and ate alone. I could hear the music they were playing, something low and jazzy. I could hear the clink of glasses and the rise and fall of laughter. The kitchen smelled like my own casserole, which they had served to their guests without mentioning who made it. That's when I saw it, pinned to the corkboard above the phone charger, a printed mortgage document, a payoff schedule for the house. I recognized the format because I had read the original carefully before I signed anything, and there, in the column marked co-signer and original contributor, was my name, Celeste Whitmore, $47,000. I had given them that money 3 years ago, not as a loan, at least not formally, as a gift, because Daniel called me and said they'd found the house and were $47,000 short on the down payment, and I had it, and he was my son, and that's what you do. I wired it within the week. I never asked for a repayment schedule, I never made an announcement, I just did it. I sat in that kitchen, eating alone, looking at my own name on a document pinned to their wall like a grocery list, and I understood something clearly for the first time. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as a resource that had already been used. I finished my dinner, I washed my own plate, and then I stepped to the far end of the kitchen, away from the noise, and I made a call. When the line picked up, I kept my voice steady. I said, "I think it's time we had that conversation." The weeks after the dinner were quiet on the surface, too quiet. The family group text, the one that used to include me for birthday plans and holiday logistics, went silent on my end. Not a glitch, a removal. I found out about a family brunch from my neighbor Patricia, who had seen Daniel's car in the driveway on a Sunday morning. Nobody had texted me. I called Daniel that afternoon. He answered on the second ring, warm and easy, like nothing was different. "Mom, hey, how are you? I heard you all got together Sunday." A pause. "Yeah, Priya's siblings were in town. It was kind of last minute." "It's fine, Daniel." "Mom, you know how Priya gets overwhelmed planning things. It wasn't intentional." He always had a version of that sentence ready. Always diplomatic, never honest. I told him it was fine because I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. But I heard what was underneath his words. He had made a choice about whose comfort came first, and it wasn't mine. Then came the block party. It was a warm Saturday in September, the whole street out with lawn chairs and coolers. I came because Patricia invited me, and because I refused to become someone who hides. I ran into Priya near the lemonade table. She was with two women I didn't recognize. "Oh," she said, seeing me. She smiled immediately. "This is Daniel's mom. She's been very involved in our lives." She paused just long enough on the word involved to make it sound like a complaint dressed as a compliment. One of her friends turned to me. "What do you do?" Before I could answer, Priya said, "She's retired. She has a lot of free time." Then she laughed lightly and steered the conversation somewhere else. I smiled. I sipped my lemonade. I noted the time, the location, and exactly what she said, because for 30 years I had worked in administration, and what administration teaches you, above everything else, is to keep records. Then came the phone call that changed my temperature entirely. Daniel called on a Tuesday evening, and his voice had that particular warmth that meant he wanted something. "Mom, so Priya and I have been talking about refinancing the house, getting a better rate. The bank's been great, but they flagged some paperwork, and it would just be cleaner if you were officially removed from the documents. It's just a formality, really." I let him finish. "Did Priya ask you to call me?" A pause longer than it should have been. We talked about it together. "I'll think about it," I told him. I hung up the phone. I didn't cry, I didn't pace. I walked to my filing cabinet, pulled open the second drawer, and took out a folder I had kept since the day I wired that money. I sat down at my kitchen table under the lamp, opened it, and started reading. What they didn't know was that I had a folder, a thick one, with dates, receipts, messages, and a letter in Priya's own handwriting that she had clearly forgotten she ever wrote. I've spent 30 years in school administration. Every meeting, every decision, every dollar, documented. It wasn't distrust that made me keep records. It was habit. It was discipline. It was 30 years of watching what happens when people assume nothing is in writing. Inside that folder, the original wire transfer receipt for $47,000, dated and timestamped. Text messages from Daniel sent before the wedding where he explicitly asked me to contribute to the down payment and told me what account to wire it to. And a handwritten note from Priya on cream-colored stationery with her initials at the top, thanking me for making the house possible. 3 sentences, signed with her full name, dated. But the document that surprised even me was one I had almost forgotten. When I made the contribution, I had drafted a simple 1-page family loan agreement, not because I didn't trust Daniel, but because Raymond, our family attorney, had advised it for tax purposes. Daniel had signed it, I had kept my copy, and because it was never formally dissolved, never officially forgiven in writing, that $47,000 could legally be reclassified not as a gift, but as an outstanding loan. I called Raymond that same night, not to sue anyone, not to start a war. I just needed to understand what I was holding and what it meant. His response surprised me. He said, "Come in Thursday. Bring everything." I walked into Raymond Chu's office on a Thursday morning with my folder and a calm I hadn't felt in months. Raymond is a precise man. He doesn't gesture much. He reads slowly and carefully, and his face gives nothing away. I watched him go through every document without a word. When he finished, he set his glasses on the desk, folded his hands, and looked at me. "Celeste, you have more standing here than you realize, significantly more." He explained it plainly. The loan agreement, unsigned and undissolved, represented a legitimate financial claim. My name as co-signer on the mortgage gave me legal standing that couldn't simply be erased by a phone call from Daniel or a request from Priya. If they attempted to refinance without formally resolving my position, they would create a serious legal complication for themselves. The bank would flag it, the title company would flag it. They couldn't move forward without me. Raymond leaned back and said something I wrote down when I got home. "Let them come to you, Celeste. They will." I drove home and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Within 2 weeks, Priya posted a series of photos on her social media. Kitchen renovation, new countertops, new backsplash, new pendant lights. The caption read, "Our dream home, finally becoming ours." 37 comments. Not one mentioned the woman's name that was still on the original mortgage document. Daniel texted me a few days later. The warmth from the last call was gone. "Mom, have you made a decision about the paperwork?" That was the whole message. Then Priya called, brief, businesslike. "We're not trying to be difficult, Celeste. We just want to move forward." Her tone said something her words didn't. It said, "You are the obstacle. Sign the paper and get out of the way." They believed it was already settled. They thought I would do what I had always done, absorb it, accommodate it, go quietly. They didn't know about Raymond. They didn't know about the folder. They had already started planning their next move inside a house they assumed was fully theirs. The refinancing appointment was scheduled for a Friday. I got a calendar invite, which almost made me laugh. They were expecting a 15-minute formality. What they didn't know was that Raymond had already contacted the bank on my behalf, and that the meeting had been quietly rerouted to his office. I wore my good blazer. I arrived 10 minutes early. I was seated when they walked in. Daniel came through the door first, in a button-down shirt, looking relaxed. Priya followed, in a blazer of her own, a leather folder under her arm. She saw me. Then she saw Raymond. Then she looked at the conference table, at the documents laid out in 2 neat stacks, and something moved across her face that she couldn't quite control. "What is this?" she said. Raymond didn't raise his voice. He never does. "This is a formal review of the financial arrangement that made the purchase of your property possible. Before any refinancing proceeds, we need to address the outstanding terms." Daniel looked at me. "Mom, you said you'd think about it. We came here to sign." I did think about it, for a long time. Raymond laid out the wire transfer receipt first, then the text messages, then the loan agreement with Daniel's signature at the bottom, and then the letter. Priya's own handwriting, on her own stationery, with her own initials at the top. He placed it in the center of the table and let it sit there. Priya stared at it. Her jaw tightened. That was personal. That wasn't meant to be. It's dated, it's signed, and it references the specific contribution amount. It corroborates the loan agreement in full. Daniel looked at Priya. I watched something pass between them, the specific discomfort of 2 people realizing they miscalculated. He turned back to me. His voice was quieter now. "Mom, we didn't mean it to be this." I had waited a long time for the right moment to say what I was about to say, not to punish him, not to humiliate Priya the way she had humiliated me, but because some things deserve to be said out loud, clearly, to the people who need to hear them. You sat me in a kitchen while your guests laughed. You introduced me to strangers as someone who was too involved, like it was something to be embarrassed about. And then you called me and asked me to remove my name from the paperwork, like I was a signature on a form, not a person who gave you $47,000 because I loved you. I paused. I didn't need a thank you every day. I didn't need a plaque, but I needed to not be made invisible in a house I helped you buy. The room was completely still, the kind of still where you notice things, the hum of the air conditioning, the faint sound of traffic outside. Priya had no answer ready. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing polished to put in front of her. The refinancing did not proceed that day. In the weeks that followed, Raymond worked with Daniel and Priya's attorney to formalize a repayment agreement. Not punitive, not designed to ruin them, just honest. A structured plan, legally binding, that acknowledged what had actually happened 3 years ago. Raymond made sure every detail was in writing. I signed it on a Thursday morning, drove home, and made myself a cup of tea. Daniel called me 4 days later. Not about paperwork. He called on a Sunday afternoon, and when I picked up, he was quiet for a moment before he spoke. He said he was sorry. He said he had let it go on too long. He said he had chosen the easier path too many times, and he knew it. It wasn't a perfect apology. It was halting and a little too short, but it was real. I could hear that it was real. We talked for an hour. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 3 years. Priya never called. I didn't expect her to. But Daniel mentioned months later, almost as a footnote, that she had told a friend, "I underestimated her." 2 words from a woman who rarely admits anything. That was enough for me. I didn't move into their house. I didn't demand a celebration. I went back to my life, my pension, my Sunday crosswords, my neighbor Patricia, my modest apartment with Gerald's photograph on the bookshelf. I sat with that photo the night the agreement was signed, and I talked to him the way I still do sometimes, told him how it all went. I think he would have smiled. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to remind them, and honestly myself, that quiet doesn't mean weak. If you've ever given everything to people who acted like you owed them more, you know exactly how this feels. Subscribe and share your story in the comments. I want to read it. Click hype to help this story reach everyone who has been quietly taken for granted. Standing up for yourself is tough, especially when it's family. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of our community. Let me know this story helped by clicking hype, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.